right. Cool. So it looks like it's live. So we'll wait, give a couple minutes.
Live!
We can just chit chat till people join us.
All right.
No, see, I love when you bring up stories like that, because we just came on live. So you're telling us about your experience as Swordfish, and like just unique stuff that I don't think, not many people know behind the scenes, right? And that movie was really popular because Halle Berry's big. So it's like,
well, we should refer to, we went live after we talked about that. I'll briefly, I was asking a question about certain maybe sexual content, let's put it that way, that I'll be sharing with the class, because I wasn't entirely sure what my age range I was dealing with. I was dealing with impressionable kids who have just, sported their first underarm hair, and but I actually worked on a film called, I really did work on a film called Swordfish, and Halle Berry was in it, and as a point of negotiating a topless scene, I needed to board the moment where she reveals her breasts to Hugh Jackman, so that the production could negotiate with her people, her reps, about how much she was going to be paid extra to be topless in the film, which is a ridiculous thing. And in fact, it was the only moment I could point to say I boarded that, because everything else was an attempt to double the backlot of Universal, the old European town, if you've ever been on the backlot tram ride. And they wanted to try and double that for Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. And it didn't work. I basically proved it didn't work. And they ended up shooting this car chase in Ventura. And so all of that, there might have been a couple of shots that that was similar, but in reality, it was all based just on the way they would have to go back and forth in different directions on the same street and rake the camera at different angles to make it look like they were all, they were going down different streets. And it was a matter of, when we're talking about screen direction, I could do the angle for you, but in fact, it's the same street, but because it was shot from different sides of the street, even it looked like it was the car was going in the same direction.
Right.
But the big problem they had there was that they had to have these cars going at full speed. They had at least like 40 miles an hour or something like that, and the streets were kind of bottlenecked by some kind of like rising hills, or essentially there was no space for the cars to actually build speed before going through set. And they would have had to put them on catapults, literally shoot them through the, and it wouldn't really work, because it would be one car followed by another car. So you can't, I don't know how fast you can load a catapult, but I doubt it would be that fast. So it was so weird, because I worked a Guy Hendricks Dias, which sounds like a disease. The guy I know that he went on to be, he is now a pretty well-known production designer, but he worked with me. He was going to do facades and stuff over there, and so he was doing those designs. I went with him. We mapped out the whole thing. It's the only time I've spent months on a job to show the production that they couldn't do what they wanted to do.
Wow, awesome. Well, before you get too deep into that kind of stuff, I should probably introduce what we're doing here, because guys are now joining us. Thanks for joining us. I guess if you just tuned in, We're speaking today with Tim Burgard. I'm really excited to have him because his experience, I mean, he's worked on movies, the latest ones are like Jurassic World and San Andreas, and it looks like you're working on
Four is coming up. Fantastic Four, another one called Geostorm is coming up.
Yeah, awesome. And not only that, you've also worked in animation and comics, right?
Yeah, it's and it isn't as though I worked in one thing and then I moved over to another thing and then to another thing. They all kind of blended together. And I mean, I ended up I started working in film. Probably I did a little something for production right out of college, but it was they were keyframes, which is single frames that show a tentpole moment of the story. Never did get. I tried to take slides of those, but they didn't turn out so well. So that's kind of lost art to me, and I'm sick about it because I think I did a really great job on it. But the comic books and animation and commercials and film, there were times I was working on all of them, within weeks or days of each other. I was doing comic book kind of on the back end, working with my friend Rick Hoberg on a few things, and I'd be doing that, in between other assignments. So,
Yeah, no, that's great because, I mean, part of what we're doing with storyboardart.org, I know some of you guys have probably seen us from social media and have been following us for a while on the events and things that we're doing. Just kind of give you a quick update, we relaunched our site, and now we have a bigger format to grow and bring you guys like Tim. But you are touching on something really important that I think the whole visual storytelling discipline is very versatile, right? Like apparently, your skills can go from, doing film work to animation work to doing sequential art in comics. And it seems like is there a big difference from doing all those different disciplines?
Yeah, there is. There really is. The one thing about, coming from somebody who basically all I really wanted to be was a comic book artist, but I always loved, movies and animation. I loved animation. But when you can actually draw something, do a finished drawing, you have the initial skill set, to go into storyboarding. The differences that come after that are entirely dictated by what your final product is going to be. I mean, when you're dealing with a comic book, there's a thing called the work for hire, which I mean, a lot of us don't particularly like that idea, but the thought behind that is that what you're doing is part of something that's going to be assembled, and what you're doing is not the final product. It's not like you're painting a landscape and you're going to go to the Sawdust Festival and sell it to somebody to hang on their wall. You're doing something that is going to be, if you're working with a comic book, you're drawing something that has been written by somebody else. It may be inked by somebody else. It's going to be colored by somebody else, probably. It's going to be lettered by somebody else. It's going to be composed for print, which means it may, it has to be set up so that it can be printed with plates and everything else. And then, it's going to be turned into an actual piece of physical something by somebody else. So you're contributing to a final product. You're not actually doing the final project yourself. And that's what animation and film and everything else. It's collaborative media, as you probably heard of that. So whatever the final thing that you're dealing with dictates a lot about what your process is. Now, with animation, it's changed a lot because it used to be basically done with cells, and you're dealing with two-dimensional drawings that would be done on clear vinyl and traditionally painted on the back side of it to color it. They even inked it like it used to be a comic book, but like as far back as 101 Dalmatians, they actually came up with a Xerox process where the penciled layouts and animated sheets would be printed on with a Xerox, and you might even be able to tell from earlier, like Peter Pan to like 101 Dalmatians, the quality of the line work looks different. It looks kind of crunchy in 101 Dalmatians. It's beautiful, you know. It's like charcoal, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of cool. So there's all these processes that went into doing animation at that point, and now with storyboarding, the animation camera has changed, because you might be doing something that's going to be created by the computer as CGI, in which case, like all kinds of special effects, visual effects now, you have a virtual camera in a virtual environment, and you can basically do anything. You know, you can move the camera in any particular way. With 2D animation, you know, your basic, Jetsons, Scooby-Doo, and all of those, you know, Space Ghost, all of that type of stuff. It was done with the idea of a camera that moves up and down. You know, if you draw a head, you would draw a head only about that big, because heads are fairly easy to do. And then the camera would come down and it would fill the screen that way. If you're doing like a space battle where there's a spaceship here and a spaceship here and 3 or 4 figures over here, you're going to get into a wide field, and the camera goes up. And there's no tilting, there's no panning. Everything else is done with the illusion of the paper, you know. And so the paper, you move the sheets over, or you actually have a table that turns. It's circular, an animation draft table, and you can make things slanted. You could do a bunch of different things, but essentially the camera is the only movement, physical movement it does is up and down. So
yeah, so now with now everything's digital, right? It's all 3D, or you know, they can composite all that kind of stuff. How is that?
I learned how to do that in 2D animation. That's when I was in animation doing television style animation. You know, I worked for a bunch of different things. I did I worked on The Simpsons. I worked on Gargoyles, but I did a lot of other crap stuff. You know.
I want to ask you about some of that probably later on, because I think, especially me growing up in the 80s, I've seen a lot of your work, and was inspired probably by it.
Yeah, and but animation, if you're going to do stuff for animation, and talk about the people who are working now, it's changed quite a lot, and it's becoming a little bit freer as far as what gets animated or how it gets animated. If you're doing something that's going to be computer animated, they're going to be, again, it depends on the actual person who's moving the images around, how good they are. But you're not limited a lot to your storytelling. So you could do all kinds of sweeping camera moves and everything else. And sometimes those are easier, and probably you should include those more than just people doing character stuff, because that's where the real difficulty is. That's where talent, you know, you need talent right down to the very end, you know. But with live action, you have a physical camera, and that physical camera has to be picked up, lugged around, you know, put on a crane, you know. So you have your limitations there.
Right, and let me just interject a minute and let people know, if you guys have signed on through Google+, which is the platform we're using with Hangouts, you can submit questions in the Q&A feature. So you should see that on your left sidebar, and we can kind of make this a little more interactive. There's been a couple of questions that have been submitted from people already in the lead up to this talk, so this is all really good stuff.
They're
anyway,
not clicking in, and they'll see me answer their questions.
Right, I can't promise we're going to get to all of it, but we'll try our best. Well, anyway, how about, I want to find out how you started out. You mentioned you wanted to get into comics, and I know you went to Art Center in Pasadena. What was your path to getting into the career that you have now?
Well, obviously, there's a desire. If there's a desire and there's an aptitude, then it'll take you a long way. But um, it took a while just to get started out of art center. I mean, I basically learned enough to do the job. Uh, and
Now, straight out of school, did you have the skills to get right into it, or?
Well, I had drawing skills to get into the college, but even from then, I was learning quite a bit. And in fact, one of the skills I think I learned that helped me the most was a figure indication, which was both helped me to break down the human body abstractly in my head, so I can draw out of my head. And with a bonus that the teacher would also taught us the proper way of using markers. So I got an education on how to use that. And for the longest period of time, you know, if you could use color markers, you could work in doing advertising boards, you know.
And did you start out doing boards right away? Was that your first like gig out of school, or
No. I mean, I did try to do comic book work, and I traveled to New York, and I did get a little bit of work from DC Comics. I also did some work for, actually before that, I ended up doing some comic book work for a comic book company called Pacific Comics, and they were in San Diego, and I think I hooked up with them through going to the San Diego comic book convention, you know, the Comic-Con. So I had a few things to show around, and then I met some people like my friend Rick Hoberg, who got into comics. It got us in the front door with animation and comics right away, and so I ended up doing storyboard cleanup for him, because he was the way that you would do animation boards for TV. Not all the time were you just sitting in the studio working there. A lot of freelancers, Rick included, would get an assignment that would get like an act and all the you know, the model sheets and everything else, and then you know, come back and have that, you know, submit that, and then the director and the producer would, you know, kind of piece that together again in-house. So I worked with him, you know, helping him meet his deadlines. So he paid me out of what he was getting paid to basically put the things on model, and to, and you have to remember though, back then it was, the state of copying was horrible. There was no scanning. You know, the computers that were around were expensive things, and you know, some animation studios actually were getting into computer coloring at that point for their animated shows. But with us, it was like whatever could, the worst Xerox machine in the office. If you could do something that it could print, then you're doing it right. You know, so we were dealing with like blue pencil. He would do like blue pencil, which for the most part wouldn't, sometimes it would, but for the most part it wouldn't Xerox. So then I would go over and put it on model with black markers. And that would be, you know, the way that you can actually print these things out, you know. And that was the process. So you needed to work within the process of doing it. Eventually markers or copiers got good enough to be able to pick up pencil a little bit better, and then we just did pencil, you know. But for the most part, and there's still cleanup people now. It's a little weird because now they're working through a digital format, you know, like Storyboard Pro or something like that. In which case, the one time I was called in to help the Hulk show, the Agents of Smash, and they said, you want to clean up some storyboards for us? We got a Japanese guy here who refuses to do it. I mean, refused to do it. You know, didn't want to put it on model, just said, you know, hey, this is how we do it in Japan. Fuck you. I don't want to, you know. And so I figured, okay, I was gonna walk in. They were gonna hand me like a stack of drawings, and I would just take them home and click. No, they hand me a PDF And I
Okay.
had to break this thing down in Photoshop and everything else. And it was like, oh God. And it was a good thing that it was like, it took place in the negative zone, or there was just floating rocks and stuff, because it would have been nasty if I had to work on a city buildings and stuff like that, for that particular thing. Oh God.
I think too that brings up a good question, because a lot of the guys, at least that I work with, they've started in animation, and they've done some animation stuff with, even with some of those limitations, because there's always budgets and that kind of thing. But then, how did you make the leap from starting, let's say, comics and the animation industry to working in films? Like, how did that career path?
Okay. I had a little bit of help with an agent. I was doing everything freelance as far as working in animation, and I pretty much had all these contacts. I had worked in house. I was working freelance. Trouble is, animation, at least at that time, was very seasonal, and it would get busy, up to a certain point, but then, everything had to be in production and ready to go by like September or October. So somebody I worked with in animation, called me up and said, "You want to help me out with a commercial?" And I said, "Cool, I'll do that." And then I met his agent, who became my agent, and I started getting more commercial work. Now, working in film back then meant if you were going to work in it, you had to be either in the union or working on a non-union, like direct to VHS, video,
Right.
movies, and I did a couple of those, but it was always this thing where, okay, if a film was not already a signature to the agreement, the union agreement, then I could work on it. So I worked on a few films like Super Mario Brothers, and eventually I ended up working on was it Carolco film called Stargate. And Stargate was non-union when it started, but it became union after I left. And I had put in, as it turned out, just the number of days I needed to become union eligible. And after that, I started working on union films. I started working all the time. And I was still doing commercials, but commercials have their own little rhythm. Because if you work on a commercial and then a couple of commercials, you end up putting it together like a string of commercials, and those same ad agencies will call you back and say, "Hey, we like working with them last time. Let's work with them again." If I get on a movie for months, then they ask for me and I'm not available, then they move on, and then they have another golden boy, and I have to start over again a little bit. But you end up, if you're not working in film for a while, you do some commercials. But anyway, so I ended up working from animation to commercials, which is live action, of course, and getting into film from there.
And a couple of users had this question too. What's the big difference from working in animation to working in movies? Do you find your techniques are different, or are you using the same kind of like skills?
Your approach has to be different, because again, it's like two different kinds of kitchens. It's like you got the Italian kitchen and you got a Chinese kitchen. You might be a good cook, but you may know how to use a knife and everything else. When you step into an animation situation, you have to deal with all the different, things that are part of that. Like, for instance, putting a character on model, so that it looks like the character, because a lot of times whatever you do in a storyboard, it's literally lifted, made, put up, enlarged by the Korean studio and used as the layout. So you have to be more meticulous and on model when you're dealing in animation. In film, only occasionally do they ask you to do a likeness of what the character is. you know, what the actor is. Sometimes the actor isn't even cast yet. So that's not the important part. What's important is the, you know, the camera placement. It's the pacing. It's the story, you know. And also when you're working in live action, you're only working in vignettes. You're working in sequences. You know, the ones that are that cost the most, like visual effects or stunts, something like that. In animation, everything has to be boarded, including the dialogue, including the talking heads. All of that needs to be boarded. You have to find an interesting way of having people talk to each other. You know, you got to do acting. And that's a big difference between the two.
Right, and then one of the questions from Akif was, how free are you to contribute to the story and the storytelling in film versus animation? I know like in the bigger studios like Pixar and that kind of stuff, the story guys have sometimes more freedom to change dialogue and input stuff. In film, are you locked down on stuff, or do you also contribute sometimes to how the scenes play out?
In animation, TV animation, let's be specific. They have a thing like standards and practices and stuff like that. This was my experience. They would have to submit scripts to be approved, and this is for daytime TV animation. And we're not talking The Simpsons. We're not talking things where in The Simpsons, you're free to, you know, come up with some stuff, you know, and but quite often you're dealing with a soundtrack, a script that has been approved, and you may already have like the actors, like a cassette or whatever of the actor's dialogue to work from. So that part is pretty much set. Your visual ability to interpret that is open. That's why they're hiring you. You know, when you're dealing in live action, let's call it coverage. Coverage is the stuff where the director or nobody is really sure what it is, but you need to take a stab at it, because you can do a scene many different ways. You could do it wide, you could do it close, you could do it from almost any angle. Your particular storytelling abilities as the board artist is to try and bring a really nice attempt at that. It'll probably be filmed many different ways just so that they have something in the editing room. But at that point, yes, you can start saying, hey, would be a great idea if we did that. You could always do a take. And if they don't want to use it, they don't have to. This little scene right here.
Oh yeah, show us something. Let's see. Do you have?
You can see this, share. See this person right there?
Wait, hold on. Click on. There's a screen share button on your left sidebar. There's a green button there. Click that so you can share it with us. And we
okay,
can
right there. Okay.
And then you're gonna say allow or accept. And let's see.
Well,
yeah, I can see it. Hopefully you guys can see that too. Go ahead.
Okay. See the cursor? See what I'm doing right here?
Mm-hmm.
That area right there? You won't see that in the movie. They probably thought it was a little bit gross to have the lady's assistant who gets eaten hanging off from the side of the monster's jaws. But that was part of what I put down there. It was an idea. I even include the moment where the monster goes back underwater, and I have a couple of a family, a nuclear family, mom, dad, kid, looking at this bloody thing coming out of out of its mouth, and they're doing their dropping their snow cone or whatever.
That was from Jurassic World, right?
That was Jurassic World, and that was one idea. And and I did a few other things. Like I was actually surprised that they used as much of the petting zoo as they did. I thought that was going to get cut out. So lots of different things. I'm asked to. Sometimes I'm told exactly what the director wants to do, and the director wants something exactly. absolutely, you know, I'll give it to you exactly. But like one of the first solo jobs I ever did as a commercial artist, I got fired because I was just waiting for the director to tell me what he wanted to do, and I wasn't adding anything. So a director wants you to be at least a springboard for ideas, you know, if not coming up with the whole damn thing. I won't say that, but you know,
So how do you know? You asked you, how do you know what working style to use when you're working with these directors? Like some guys might know exactly what they want. You know, I've seen that sometimes. Or, you know, other guys are waiting for you to solve the problems. Like how do you approach that when you get a new job?
Well, you do need to roll with the blows, roll with the punches, because a lot of people, and it goes from being complete, you know, control freaks to, I can't even pay attention to this now. Please put something down on paper. Even to the point where the producers want storyboards and the director doesn't want to deal with it. And so they just hand you a script and say, here, do this, because we need boards. And then maybe one of these days the director will look at it, you know? I give you a couple examples, 2 examples. One was it was called Dead Drop when I went on it, but it was released as Chain Reaction. It was a Keanu Reeves film, and it was done by the director of The Fugitive, whose name escapes me for the moment, but I'll come up with it. Anyway, I go in, meet him first day. He says, hey, great to have you on, whatever. I go weeks without seeing this guy. I'm dealing only with the visual effects guy, with a production designer, and with a stunt guy. And then I see him maybe once. We go out to, this is in Chicago, we go out to Michigan Avenue Bridge to see it go up and down, which is part of the big sequence I'm working on. Do that. Then comes the day, hey, we're having a storyboard meeting. Come on and, you know, and come in. And so I said, oh, great. I finally get feedback, you know, and I bring my paper, I go in, and the director, Davis, he basically says, okay, now how are we going to get all of these shots? We're going to set up the camera here. He basically was going on with everybody in the department. No criticism about anything, no changes. Just let's do all of this, and then let's do 15 other different things. You know, that's one thing. And that was just me dealing with everybody else but the director. Now, cut to Jumanji. I get hired first day. I talked to Jim Bissell, the production designer.
That was a Johnstone movie, right?
Yeah, Joe Johnson. And he does feature in this story. I'm talking with Jim Bissell. Said, well, here's the sequence we're going to be working on here. Here's the script and whatever. So for that first day, I'm basically roughing out this whole sequence. And then the next day, Joe Johnson comes over and says, oh, hi, I'm Tim, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, and because I'm a dutiful, you know, employee, and, you know, I thought this was a storyboard meeting. And I said, oh, and here's what I did for the, and he turns to me and says, are you one of these guys that, you know, can only work if you do it your own way? And I go, what? And I said, no, I'll work whatever way you want, you know. And it says, oh, okay, well, I'm going to tell you what I want. And then he proceeded to storyboard the damn movie and hand me the boards. And I'm looking at it and I said, okay, you want me to color these, or
he's a pretty good artist.
He storyboarded Star Wars.
Right, he came from
storyboards. I'm saying, isn't this kind of the opposite direction this is supposed to go? Aren't I supposed to provide you with storyboards? You know, I mean, okay, I'll direct your movie. What? You know, so we ended up. Luckily, I was also part of the art department doing other things too. And eventually, Joe Johnson started working with another guy named James Haggadis, and I said, okay, here's the sequence we want to, and so they ended up allowing me to create something, but I'm going, nobody's ever handed me storyboards and said, here, storyboard this. I mean, that's ridiculous.
It must make your job easier, right?
Yeah, it's you know, you could do my job too, I guess, but I thought you were supposed to be directing this film. You know, I mean,
right.
Hey.
Well, let me get to some of these, because a lot of our users are younger guys trying to get in the business. They want to have a career in this stuff, and we have a lot of questions about skills. Like, in your opinion, and now working on movies and coming from animation, and also you've taught at Art Center and other places too. What do you feel like are the skills that you need, like the most important skills as a story guy or a storyboard artist to work in the business?
Okay, essentially, you have to be a communicator. What you put down on paper has to read the way you intend it to read. So if you're drawing a figure and you expect it to be a child or an adult man or a cute woman or an old woman or whatever, no matter how rough you do it, it has to communicate that. Because camera, we're talking live action stuff. Actually, this is for animation too. You have to understand perspective. You have to, because camera angle is all about perspective, and camera lenses are how perspective is either forced or flattened. You know, so if you're a long lens, things are going to be flattened out. You know, if a person is sitting next to a table and there's a can of Coke, that can of Coke is going to be the proper, you know, scale to the person's hand and everything else. If you're going to do it wide angle lens and do something dynamic, especially if you're trying to do something for commercial where the can of Coke is going to be the primary focus, then that can may dominate that frame where everything else goes back in space. And that's because you're probably using a wider angle lens and you're forced perspecting it a little bit. You have to understand perspective to tell the stories. So you have your basic drawing skills and your perspective. It's also important to understand the language of film. And this goes for animation too, because when we're talking about perspective, you have to cheat perspective because you're really working in a two-dimensional format. In fact, it's all two-dimensional. You know, the fact that you have 3D movies out there is like a freak of nature, and they do weird things with color to pull things out. But it isn't a hologram. You know, you can't walk around and see the side of the person, you know.
Projected flat on a screen, right?
You're only seeing what's projected out towards you. So, and when you're working in animation, you have to create perspectives. You know, and so you have to understand it maybe even more. So you have to have those things, and you have to have a basic storytelling sense. You know, don't be confusing. You have to, you know, you can't. For instance, there's a thing called a jump cut, where you go from one shot to a shot that's way too similar to the one before, and you're throwing people out because for a moment they're trying to figure out, okay, what just changed? Because this thing looks almost the same, you know, and essentially you have to have a good sense of storytelling.
So there's drawing skills, perspective, and then you're mentioning the film language too. How did you learn all that stuff? Like, where did you get, for example, the film language, which usually isn't covered in an art like school setting, right?
Well, I learned a lot of that on the job, I have to admit. I did take a short film class at Art Center, but we were dealing with, you know, literally Super 8 film stuff, and I was piecing things together, and because I was also a full-time student there trying to do a painting overnight, I really didn't. I just got some of the basic language, but I did learn quite a bit in working in animation, because I had to learn to cheat. You're basically cheating a lot. You're trying to create a movement that really isn't there. Remember, the animation camera goes up and down. So when you want things to go side to side or up and down or whatever, you need to figure things out. In fact, you can, if you bend perspective a little bit, you can do a nice flat drawing that will look, if you move your camera along it, or you move it in front of your camera, it looks like a camera tilt up, which is different than a tracking shot or a pan, because it's a whole different movement and it looks different.
You wouldn't happen to have any examples of that you could show us at the moment?
That's actually a quick thing.
Or which goodies do you have lined up that we could use?
Well, I have things like first-person shooter type of stuff. This is the idea of a POV. This is carried over from like your first-person shooter.
Cool. Click on your screen share button again. And
it's not
that with the group. Yeah.
Screen share. Okay, here we go.
The left, it's a green button on your left side now.
Okay, can you see that now? This is all a first-person type of thing.
Yes, got that. Keep going.
And I'm applying a tracking shot here. However, this was for a commercial, and I've literally taken out all my screen direction from there and just left the images. But I've got all kinds of stuff. Let me see here. All right, this is from the first Wolverine movie. You see that 2A, 2B?
Click on the screen share button again. I think it clicked off.
Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah, there it is.
See that 2A, 2B? That's a push-in, not a zoom-in. That's a push-in, because I'm coming up and looking at him from, now I'm a little sideways, now I'm looking at him from above. Another push-in, going from an over-the-shoulder. Reverse angle. I'm first in front of this guy, then I'm behind this guy as he turns towards camera. Now we can see the Wolverine, the tank, adamantium tank, going crazy in the background. Another push in. Another push in. See that dolly? That's a camera angle. This is something you would have to fully animate in animation. I'm at the head side of the tank right here, but this is the view if the camera were to physically move around to an area where we can see these adamantium claws pop out. So, and then in this case, pulling back, insert shots. Him basically, here's another dolly where he's standing there screaming and we move around him and staring at his new claws. It's one of my favorite frames. I didn't intend to do a likeness, but it came out very close to what Hugh Jackman looks like when he's screaming his face off. And so you can see, like, here's a shot where we're with the generals and it pans over to this character. Here becomes his POV, but I include a reflection so he stays in the shot, even though we cut to his POV. So it's also a point of connecting these things. This reads together because I'm not isolating these deals. They're at points they intersect. Okay.
Wow, so awesome. Those drawings are so clear, and it's almost like you get into the scene just by looking at your drawings, and what you're talking about perspective. It seems like it seems like it's just flowing. Like you're not even trying in a lot of ways because your drawings are so fluid. Like in doing that, for example, that sequence that you showed, how long did it take you to do that? And
you know what? That's what a lot of people ask me, and sometimes you work tighter than others. That would actually be, I was into it at that point, and I was working fairly loosely. And a full, if you were to break it down without me going back in and saying, okay, now, or including going in and adding tones later and cleaning things up a little bit, I would say I'm probably around 25 frames a day, which would be about 8 hours. That's what I basically quote my price at. I should be able to do that. But depending on complexity, I could get up to 40, you know. And it's a lot of times when I say you were talking about the way it was flowing, a lot of times what I like to say that I'm like the first person to see the movie, because, you know, they're giving me, there's nothing visual until I'm doing it. And there isn't any, you know, a film, there isn't anything going on. I'm basically, you know, doing the story structure in my visually and on paper. So I'm the first person, and even before that, I'm seeing it in my head, you know. And so it's kind of going from moment to moment in my head, and I'm trying to keep up with my pencil sometimes.
Awesome. Awesome. I want to transition a minute to, again, some of the user questions that we hit on. We had this question a lot, which was, you know, younger guys trying to get in the industry. One of the questions I thought was awesome was one guy is asking, can you be a newcomer late in the game? Like he put a number, let's say 35 years old. Can you still do this at 35? And if, you know, what advice would you give to a younger artist who's just starting out, who wants to get in the business now? Like,
okay, that's the most common. That's probably the most common one. And the first thing I would say is that unless you have the skills, you may get a job, but that won't lead to another job. If you can't do the job, then, you know, and that's why even though there's some people here that go from, you know, their dad did it and then they did it, well, they actually have skill. It's not nepotism. You know, occasionally you have some brothers that work together. You know, a couple right now. I meet twins and brothers that are both gotten into the business, but they basically got into drawing and stuff together. They grew up doing it. But the thing is that the way I got into the business is based on where the business was when I was there. Where the business is right now is really difficult to talk about. I could get into things like what's allowed by the union. In some ways, it's even better than it was when I started. Before, there was it was like a catch-22. You know, you can get into the union when you work on a union film, and you can't get on a union film unless you're in the union. Right. So you have to get on a film before it turns into a union film. And I know only one guy that ever got onto a film because everybody in the union was working already. And he was good, but he got in because nobody could do the job. There wasn't anybody available.
Wow, right.
Now they have something called producer's request or something like that. And it's a production can hire one person one time. I don't mean for one day. I mean, you know, they can't fire the guy and then hire anybody else they want. They can hire anybody they want, one person, for a production, for, you know, either as a storyboard artist or as a production illustrator. They can do that one time. So there isn't that barrier there used to be where you couldn't work. There's no way. So if you have you know, a friend, or you work with guys at AFI or some other film school, and you've done a couple commercials with a guy, and then he starts to direct his own first movie, yeah, he can ask you to be on it. You know, there's nothing stopping you. But for the general, basically, the way it mostly works is you make contacts, you show your professionalism. If you've got to work in commercials for a while, you work with directors all the time, and at one point either a producer or somebody involved in the in the commercials may decide that they like you, they like your work, and they want to hire you. You know, that's probably the best way to do it.
And let me segue into this question. Thank you guys, by the way, for the viewers right now who are submitting these questions. It's all really good stuff. We'll try and hit as many as possible. But I think it's a good segue. Is okay. He's asking Eric, is there a route into live action boarding in LA features? It seems like he's only gotten gigs on the East Coast. So what's your experience like transitioning from one local area to another? I know you're in LA, so you probably just deal with
well, that's a good point, because it starts getting into what they call runaway production. And what runaway production basically is, you know, there's incentives to work in different films or whatever. Like the movie I'm working on, or had been working on, the sequel to Independence Day, they moved their art department to New Mexico. And they ended up taking people from LA with them, but I'm sure that they hired people in New Mexico. So there's productions that are moving away from LA, and in fact, we'll hire local people for wherever they are. And I mean, they're setting, I mean, the East Coast has always been, you know, like New York or whatever. They've always had like advertising and film and whatever. And then there's, and television. Then there's Detroit. Now there's New Orleans. There's Utah. You know, there's places all over, you know, Florida. Oh, also Austin, Texas. I mean, there's a lot of places where you can work, you know, but LA, I just basically said it. You basically need to have contacts, you know. I mean, I still have agents, although I get a lot of my work through just being known now.
Word of mouth, right?
Word of mouth or references from other people, you know, because I refer other people for jobs. They refer me for jobs. But when you're dealing with an agency, they might be able to help, but they also have to know how much work they can get you. And if you know, if you're at that moment where you're just about to break through, then they might want to take a chance on you and see if they can get you on something before it becomes a signature to the general agreement for the different unions, you know, or get on something before, you know, while it's in development. There's a lot of people who aren't in the union, for instance, who are doing stuff for Marvel.
You don't necessarily have to be in the union, right, to find work. It's not.
No, you don't. No, you don't. It's harder, but yeah, there's people working out here, and but there is a reason why, as a craft, the illustrators and storyboards represent a smaller percentage than a lot of the people in the art department. And that is, a little goes a long way, you know. I mean, one or two storyboard artists could probably handle an entire film. You know, sometimes you see a long list of them, but generally that's because they hire some of them. Then the movie goes away for a while, and they have to hire more people again. That's what happened with me in Jurassic World. Myself and two other guys got hired because, you know, they went down for a while, and all these other people weren't available again.
Right. Well, let me ask you a job-specific question too, because one of our users is asking, you know, with CGI and visual effects, now the camera can essentially be anywhere. And she was asking about, you know, actually documenting a steady cam shot versus, you know, a camera that's on a tripod and just doing the regular zoom out stuff. But in relation to that, what has been like your toughest professional challenge? And if you give me an example of something like an unusual story task that you've been given, and how did you solve it?
Toughest is kind of they're all so different. You know, if I have to do something completely out of my head, that means I have to create a lot of stuff. It means in some cases, I have to create the environment as well as the action, in which case I literally become the creator at that point, you know, and to me, that's a lot of work. It actually is easier when somebody tells you exactly what to do, because then you say, I understand it, here it is. And it's just a matter of just sitting down and doing it, you know. Actual sometimes it's actual physical problems. I mean, you know, honestly, there is a physical area to this. You have to be able to be comfortable, to be able to have decent light. You know, if you're in a miserable working condition, like I was on Super Mario Brothers in July, and in the interior of they rented out a cement factory, and we were literally passing out from heat, you know, in South Carolina or North Carolina. That was probably the most miserable I'd ever been. And if you're at a point where you're sweating on you're dripping sweat on your drawing, and you put your hand, anytime your hand touches the drawing, you can lift your hand and it's stuck to your hand. You know, wow, that's the worst. I mean, creatively, I mean, if you like your work, you know, it's not tough. It's just that it's interesting, you know. That's probably closer to it.
Yeah, so then it seems like, okay, you have the solid foundation with drawing skills. You got the film language down, obviously, just looking at your work. Yeah. It seems like you've made connections in your career and that kind of stuff, which kind of leads to your other job. And I know I get this question a lot too, but it seems like you have built a career based on your skills and your storytelling, your knowledge. Right. And so I'm assuming this is the only thing you do, right? You have a comfortable career doing this stuff. Like, it is possible, is basically it. Or my question is it possible to have a career doing this?
It is possible, but it's in the end, it's a freelance job, because you can be as lucky as a friend of mine, Darren Denlinger, who basically goes from Marvel film to Marvel film. He's on a major run, you know, where he could in fact be working on something else now. Last time I talked, he was on the Civil War Captain America film, but he worked on Ultron, and I met him way back when we both worked on the last Hulk movie. So you could get onto a major thing where you basically are working all the time, but it's a freelance job. And as of right now, I don't know where my next job's coming from.
Does that scare you? Is it like, oh my God,
well, after doing this for a while, after doing it a while, the fear kind of goes away, because you have the confidence of knowing that something's going to come on. But I had, you know, these last 2 years have been very good for me, but the 3 years before that were very scarce. I was doing a lot more stuff dealing with, you know, with commercials, and I was looking for other kind of job things. That led me into teaching, frankly, because I needed at least one thing that I could depend on, you know, as a regular gig. And I'm getting better at it. But you know, it's not that long before, you know, if I wanted to, I could retire. You know, it's like another 10 years, you know. And I have no idea what the business is going to be like in the next 5 years. So it's a matter of I have a certain amount of skill set. I mean, it really, if you know, if you're in LA, if you're in places, New York too, I guess, where your cost of living is high, then there is a bit of a problem, because you have to make a certain amount of money, you know, to afford your mortgage or your rent or whatever like that, you know. If you're in a rental situation, it's probably even better, because then if you needed to, you can move, you know, to some place where there is a little bit more work, and it's a little cheaper to live. But for the most part, you know, you have to keep looking for opportunities. You know, if I can make my mortgage doing a comic book, I'd be doing a comic book right now. You know, I still have my skill sets for animation, you know, and I would love to get into other things more. Maybe, you know, who knows if I may work for a game company at some point. You know, maybe I'll move up to Cupertino and do a Pixar movie. Who knows? You know, all these things are possibilities. but but right now I don't know where my next job's coming from.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point. It seems like it's almost job security that you have the skills that you have, that you're able to do video games, that you're super confident in doing animation again, and you can right away go back into doing the film work, because, you know, just from my perspective, it seems like you have put in the time to build that foundation, that those skills are valuable for people.
Yeah, I mean, it's at this point, I mean, if I have to learn a new skill set, like for instance, I bought my first Cintiq just recently. You know,
Your first one, right?
well, I played, well, yeah, because the way I go through computers, you know, I have to imagine that they'll come up with a hologram version pretty soon.
Right. So that, you know, this question from Amanda too, I think is totally pertinent, is like, how has the animation industry changed? I guess you could also apply that to the film industry or entertainment industry. And how have you adapted to it? So one thing that you're doing is technology, right? Is adapting that way. What about skill set? Is there anything that you've changed with your knowledge and skills because of the industry?
Well, essentially, I have to learn a little bit more about the workplace of the modern TV animation, because again, it's a factory. You know, I could tell stories all day long. It's, you know, come on, you look at what's on TV, it's not brain surgery, you know. Anybody who's been in it for a little while, from a talent point, that's not the problem. The problem is being able to, you know, deliver a package in the way they want it, which is probably in Storyboard Pro, done in layers, you know, all digital and everything else. And I'm capable of that. And so it may be something that I'll be doing in the future, but it's also a matter of reestablishing ties there. You know, I know all kinds of people who are in there, but just knowing people doesn't mean I get a job from them, because they're basically, I'd be taking a job from them. Really.
Right.
You know.
Cool. And just one clarification question here is, what union were you talking about when you mentioned the union earlier? Which union are you in?
I'm in Local 800, which is part of the Art Directors Guild. Used to be 790, which was the motion picture matte artists and illustrators. But that's now a craft within Local 800. I used to belong to Local 839, which is the film and television cartoonists, which is for animation. So those are local guilds. Animation, by the way, for those of you who want to get into that, there's no problem about getting the job. If they see you can do it, they basically can hire you, and then after 2 weeks, they will ask you to join the union if it's a union job. And so there's no problem getting the work from there. And like I said, it's a little bit more different. You know, I mean, you could get hired on a film, like I said, for live action, and then after 30 days, you'll be asked if you want to join the union. And if you do, then you will continue to be available or on the roster to work on live action film in the union. If you decide that you don't want to pay the union dues, then that opportunity is squandered. You go back to you know, to square one. But yeah, that's the union I'm talking about.
Cool. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and we're kind of getting towards the end of this talk, but I did want to reveal and mention that in fact, you talked about it, that you got into teaching, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful gift for people like us and guys that are coming through in the industry to learn from veterans like you. And one of the things that we've been working together with is to create a course based on your live action experience to do live action storyboards and storytelling. And that's going to be coming up in July. So that's kind of the big reveal that we've been doing. But talk about a little bit about your teaching stuff. Like, what has been your experience doing that, working with younger artists? And what do you feel are the most like pertinent skills or recommendations that you have for them?
Okay, well, my experience is actually teaching filmmakers, people who want to be directors and cinematographers. So first of all, getting them to be able to do stick figures that, you know, that aren't completely sucky, is probably one of the first things. So anybody who has some basic drawing skills, we can just start getting into the filmmaking stuff, and I don't have to, you know, get too far into, you know, why put two eyeballs on one side of the head and the nose on the other side, and let's try and make it like a natural looking thing, you know. But yeah, I've been getting the people I've been teaching also are like second semester, so even though they're in the film department, they aren't as familiar with the vocabulary. So we're going to definitely get into camera. We're going to be talking about the difference between a tilt and you know, a crane shot, or a pan and a tracking shot, so that you guys, you said earlier, you know, what's the difference between working CGI and whatever. Yeah, a CGI virtual camera can do anything, but why would you want it to? Because if you remember those early fighting games like Tenken and stuff, it was amazing that this camera would move around, but it did it for no particular reason. It was like you put a GoPro on a soccer ball and started kicking it around, you know, the screen. It had no reason to do any of that. So you want to motivate this stuff. And in fact, you know, basics of storytelling is if you can tell that you're, if you can be so precious that you're doing shots just for the sake of doing shots and it takes you out of the story, you're doing it wrong. It should be invisible. And so we're hopefully, you know, with enough tools, you know, you can make it seamless.
That's awesome. And I want to give the guys, I want to thank everybody for watching this. And I'm going to give you guys the link to the class that we're talking about with Tim. And the great thing is that we get to listen from you directly and your experience and that kind of stuff. I love when you're talking about the camera, because I feel that's so important that you see everybody watches these movies now, and it you know, I think it's very evident when it's like it's almost like they're pushing too many buttons on the CGI and the special effects, and the camera's going everywhere and it's pulling you out of the story. So it's great that you're touching on that, and hopefully and what you're talking about is training young filmmakers to make conscious decisions about what they're putting on the screen.
Yeah. Yeah, just because you want to do a particular shot, you ever hear the thing called you have to kill your babies? That is, you have to be willing to, you know, for the service of the story, be able to say, oh, I'd love to do this, but it just doesn't work for what I'm trying to accomplish. And you have to, that's part of storytelling, and that goes towards storyboarding too.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I think on that note, I mean, it's very inspirational knowing that, you know, you've had such a diverse career, and that the skills that you've built up have led you into the direction that you're doing, but also that there's hope that you can learn this stuff, right? That I feel like the trial and error of storytelling and what you're talking about with the film language, that has it been your experience that when you pick that up, that you can communicate these ideas to an audience in a way where everybody understands?
Yeah, I mean, you can actually think of it a lot of different ways of art, or like music, for instance. You can learn to move your fingers along a piano key, then maybe you can learn chopsticks, but then now try and be moving and you know, moody with something. Try and you know, get an emotional feeling of like excitement or sadness or something through your instrument. It's basically, when you have the tools, then you can start, you know, creating things, you know, like mood, excitement, you know, all those, you know, all these different things. And there's ways of doing it, you know, and there's creative ways of doing it. And you can, you know, if you have the eyes, if you basically learn to see, you may be able to pick that out in other people's work that you like, Spielberg, you know, whoever, even Michael Bay, God help us, you know, you may be able to figure something out, you know, and use it yourself, you know.
Right, awesome. Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate the time that you spent with us. I think it's super helpful that people get directly from a guy working in the industry, you know, your feedback and what you feel is important. And thank you guys for listening out there, the attendees and the people who have submitted questions. Hopefully we'll keep this going and do this on a regular basis. And take a look at the link. So in the coming weeks, we're going to be announcing this class and in the collaboration with Tim. So that's, for us, really exciting. And yeah, so once again, thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. And I should also mention that this is being recorded so that if you guys missed it or you want to replay it, we'll post it on the website so that you can see it again. But awesome. Thanks again, Tim. Appreciate it. We'll sign off now, and we'll talk to you soon. All right. Take it easy.